So let's talk capital. This is the private capital curve, total private capital into the United States since 2000. That spike in the middle, that's the subprime crisis. The US experienced a doubling of private capital in 7 years. That was too much too fast. We had a recession, knocked 5% of GDP off in 18 months. Since then, the US has been growing at a much more sustainable rate, much closer to the century average. That's a doubling. Same data, relative terms. The little hump in the middle is a double. Here's the Eurozone. The Europeans had a tripling in the time the Americans had a doubling. As a result, their financial crisis hit harder, lasted longer. Italy still has not recovered. That's Greece. 7-fold increase in 7 years. They so far have had a 40% reduction in GDP. That's worse than the Great Depression, and they are not done. Here's Brazil. Not as bad as Greece, but still not great. This is what a lost decade looks like, and that assumes they get the politics right. Spoiler alert, they're not. I don't know how many of you follow Brazilian politics. I find it delightful. They had a presidential election last year in which the two final candidates, one was campaigning from prison where he had been convicted of corruption, not indicted, convicted. You can still run. And the other dude at one of his final public rallies said that the real problem with the Nazis is that they were just far too soft on their domestic foes. Why don't we go ahead and pencil in a second lost decade for Brazil? Here's India and Turkey. Two countries who have already elected ethno-nationalist leaders who don't think twice about spawning race riots that kill a couple hundred people a pop when they feel it serves their tactical political purposes. They have yet to begin their credit adjustment. And then here's the People's Republic of China. Let me bring that down for you. Yeah, China is now the most overcredited country in human history in both absolute and relative terms. You've all heard about the tightening they've done the last few months. That's that little bit of a fallback at the top. Yeah, that's not going to end well, folks. And at this time of transition, who has the guns really matters. Now, on the right, you've got a traditional jump carrier. On the left, you have a super. In the deep blue sea, it takes 7 jump carriers to stand up to 1 super. There are 21 jump carriers in the world, 11 are American. There are 11 super carriers in the world, all are American. At current rates of global naval buildout, the combined navies of the rest of the planet will roughly equal American naval power in the year 2240. As an American, I don't lose a lot of sleep over this. But consider this. The United States is the only country that can theoretically support something like the global order. And now it's a country that retains the capacity to kick in any door on the planet whenever it wants and not care about what happens the next day. The United States is shifting from the greatest source of stability to the greatest source of disruption. But it doesn't have a policy to guide that at present. So let's run through what's going on in trade. 4 big issues going on. First of all, energy. The United States will become a net exporter of every source of energy product by the end of this year. And the cost of producing in the American shale fields will be below Saudi Arabia by the end of next year, which means that the Americans look at energy markets differently. It used to be that stability was good to keep the markets in place, which was good for the American consumer. That relationship no longer holds. All of a sudden, deliberate disruption in energy markets is good for American business because the US president does not require approval from Congress to allow or disallow crude exports. I strongly suggest you look at what's going on in Venezuela and Iran in that light. Disruption is now good for American business. Next up, steel and aluminum tariffs, automotive tariffs. You may have noticed that the Trump administration has not withdrawn any of the tariffs in those categories that it has imposed, even when it finally gets a new trade deal. They are being held in reserve as hammers to force cooperation on whatever the issue of the day happens to be. It's the global order in reverse. It used to be that the United States would sacrifice economic access in order to achieve security preeminence. Now the United States is acting almost neo-imperially when it comes to trade talks and holding these tools back for whatever it needs at any given moment, ally or enemy. And then finally, there's currency markets. This is a pretty savvy crowd. I don't have to go into the guts of this, but let me kind of break it down real fast. There's a three-step process in currency trade and manufacturers trade. If you are, say, Argentina and you're selling a load of goods to Thailand, you don't get paid in Thai baht because no one in Argentina has or wants baht. And you don't get paid in pesos because nobody in Thailand has or wants pesos. So the Thais pay in their own currency, it's exchanged for the US dollar, and then it's re-exchanged for pesos. Three-step process. Under Barack Obama, the United States inserted itself into that middle step so it could allow or deny individual transactions based on what was going on in Iran. The Trump administration has taken those tools and amped them up so it can allow or deny all transactions from the bank or even country of choice. This does not simply deny that entity access to the American market, but to all global trade. And since the United States isn't a trading nation, the impact on the American consumer is minimal. The guy using these tools is Robert Lighthizer. He is the only person in the Trump administration who has been there from the beginning and the only one with any sort of autonomy. Now, Lighthizer is kind of infamous in American circles for not giving interviews. And this is not his first stint in government. He used to work for Reagan. You guys remember the Plaza Accords? When the United States basically bludgeoned the European and Japanese allies into forcibly devaluing the US dollar? This is the guy who was assigned to Japan in the aftermath to make sure they never reneged. And whenever he got his marching orders from the White House, he'd walk into the Japanese Ministry of Finance, lay out the American position, and when the Japanese issued their rebuttal, he would take off his translator microphone, take it apart, have a little G.I. Joe war with the pieces on the desk while the Japanese spoke. And when they were done, put it back together, put it on, and say, well, that was riveting, but we're going to do it my way, right? This is the guy in charge of the trade talks. This is the guy who's hosting the Chinese in Washington right now. So let's go through the trade talks. First up with the Koreans. At his first opportunity, President Moon of South Korea walked into the Oval Office and said, there is no version of a future without America in the world where my country survives. So you want to renegotiate the Chorus trade deal? Fine. What do you want? We will cave on everything. Didn't have a choice. Now, was that enough? Is this new deal enough to make sure that when the rubber hits the road, the Americans will be there? President Moon doesn't know. Donald Trump doesn't know. No one knows. But I can guarantee you, without that trade deal, there would have been no chance at all. Next up was Mexico. Now, the guy on the right, that is Manuel Obrador. He is kind of the combination of the blind ideology of Jaroslaw Kaczynski of Poland with the ego of Emmanuel Macron of France, with the body of Angela Merkel of Germany, the organizational skills of any random Italian, and the math command of Jeremy Corbyn, all in one dude. And when he became president, he was elected in a landslide, and everyone was convinced that there was going to be a pissing match between him and Donald Trump because they're both nationalists. But ironically, therein lied the opportunity. Obrador was smart enough to know that if he picked a fight, that would define his presidency. So he reached out to his predecessor and to Trump and said that if you two guys can figure out what's next, what NAFTA 2 happens to be, I'll get it ratified. So far, he's been a man of his word. Where are my Canadians? Wow, security here sucks.